Imagine this, armed men visiting your village. They gather all the boys from 8 to 18 years old. They inspect them like cattle, checking their teeth, their body, their minds, and then they conscript the strongest, the brightest, the best. Your son, your brother, your neighbor's son. They parade these boys hundreds of miles away, force them to convert to Islam, circumcise them, beat them, starve them, break them, then rebuild them into the most feared fighters on the planet. This is not fantasy. This is how, for over 400 years, the Ottoman Empire built its most elite military corps, the Janissaries, Europe's first standing army, a corps so elite they could make and unmake sultans. And it all started with Christian children snatched from their families and sacrificed to become Islam's perfect warriors. This is the story they never told you. The Ottomans called it Devshirme, literally collecting or gathering. But let's call it what it really was, systematic child kidnapping on an industrial scale. Starting in the 1380s, Ottoman scouts descended on Christian villages across the Balkans every 3 to 4 years. Albania, Serbia, Bosnia, Bulgaria, Greece, Hungary, Romania. They came with registers, with quotas, with imperial authority, and they came for your children. The selection was merciless and precise. They wanted boys aged 8 to 18, old enough to train, young enough to mold. They excluded only sons because even the Ottomans understood you couldn't destroy every family. They rejected orphans, stating that boys without a dose of family values made poor soldiers. Urban craftsmen's children were off limits to protect the economy. Jews were explicitly exempt. But if your son was Christian, physically perfect, intelligent, and strong, he was exactly what they wanted. This is what the scouts looked for: physical perfection, no defects, above average intelligence, athletic build, and from a healthy family. And they noted it all down in double registers: names, ages, physical descriptions, parents. One copy for Constantinople, one for the local records. This was not random rating. This was bureaucratic efficiency, the business of empire. Battalions of 100 or more boys dressed in red, marching hundreds of miles to Constantinople. Some tried to escape. Their parents were executed, hanged from their own doorsteps as an example. A 1601 imperial decree made it crystal clear: whenever someone of the infidel parents or some other should oppose the giving up of his son for the Janissaries, he is immediately hanged from his doorsill. Think about that. Parents watching their sons disappear, knowing resistance meant death. Villages losing their brightest boys every few years for centuries. Entire generations of Christian families having their bloodlines severed, converted, and turned against their own people. But here's the even darker aspect. This system violated Islamic law. The Ottoman Empire claimed to protect dhimmi, Christians and Jews under Muslim domination, from forced conversion. It was at the heart of Islamic rule. And yet here were Ottoman officials, systematically violating this precept. And they knew it. How did they justify it? Creative theology. Ottoman authorities claimed that Balkan Christians had converted to Christianity after Islam's founding, so they didn't deserve dhimmi protections. It was legal sophistry. Qanun, the Sultan's law, overriding Sharia when politically convenient. The empire's religious establishment looked the other way because the system was too valuable to abandon. Once in Ottoman territory, the real horror began. This was not school. This was systematic destruction and reconstruction of human identity. First stop, Turkish Muslim families in Anatolia. The boys lived with these families for between 2 and 7 years. Here they were forcibly circumcised, physically marking them as Muslim. Forced conversion to Islam, destroying their spiritual identity. Language erasure. Turkish replaced their mother languages. Cultural indoctrination. Ottoman practices replaced Christian customs. They worked in fields and construction, not to learn, but to toughen them physically, to break them, to make them forget who they were. The brightest boys were taken to the Enderun Palace schools, where they could become grand viziers, the prime ministers of the empire, former Christian slaves quite literally ruling the Ottoman Empire. It sounds like opportunity until you remember that it was at the expense of removing everything about who you were. The others, destined for the Janissaries. Their training was deliberately brutal. Near starvation, sleep deprivation, constant beatings. It was monastic and military combined, designed to create warriors with absolute loyalty and zero connection to their past lives. They learned firearms and siege warfare, the cutting edge of military technology, languages and mathematics. Because smart soldiers are better soldiers. Islamic studies, because they needed to believe in what they were fighting for. But most importantly, they learned that their only family was the core. Their only father was the Sultan. Their only brothers were fellow Janissaries. They couldn't marry until age 40, couldn't wear beards, couldn't own businesses. They lived in barracks, ate together from communal cauldrons, and existed in a deliberately isolated warrior culture. They only achieved true Janissary status at age 24 or 25, after proving themselves completely broken from their past and remade in the Sultan's image. Think about what this means. 8-year-old Christian boys became Muslim warriors who fought against Christian kingdoms, sometimes their own homelands. Sons killed fathers. Brothers killed brothers. Not because they wanted to, but because their identities had been systematically destroyed and rebuilt. But here's the twisted truth. It worked, horrifyingly well. The Janissaries became the most feared military force in the medieval world, Europe's first modern standing army, the first infantry corps equipped with firearms. They adopted gunpowder weapons in the 1440s, decades before most European armies even understood how devastating firearms could be. Battle of Kosovo, 1389. 2,000 Janissaries helped secure Ottoman control of Serbia, beginning 500 years of Balkan domination. Fall of Constantinople, 1453. Janissaries breached the walls of the Byzantine capital that had stood for over 1,000 years. The Christian empire that traced its lineage to Rome fell to an army partly composed of converted Christian children. Battle of Mohács, 1526. Janissary musket volleys obliterated Hungarian cavalry charges. Central Europe lay open to Ottoman conquest. The irony? Many Janissaries in that battle were originally from Hungary and the Balkans, former Christians killing Christian armies. Their military innovation was revolutionary. They pioneered rotating lines of volley fire in 1605, creating continuous firepower that could break any cavalry charge. Their siege warfare expertise was unmatched. Their discipline under fire became legendary. At their peak under Suleiman the Magnificent, about 20,000 Janissaries formed the empire's military backbone. They conquered territory from the gates of Vienna to the Persian Gulf. They terrorized European armies. They made the Ottoman Empire a superpower. And they were paid for it. Regular salaries, revolutionary for medieval armies, tax exemptions, clothing allowances, war bonuses, shares of plunder, pensions. They lived better than most Ottoman subjects, in barracks with kitchens, arsenals, and in elite units at Topkapi Palace, marble floors and gilded doors. Some rose to incredible power. Grand Vizier Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, a Serbian boy taken in the Devshirme, effectively ruled the Ottoman Empire for 14 years. The architect Sinan, also taken as a child, created masterpieces like the Süleymaniye Mosque. Slave boys became the empire's elite. But this is where the story gets extremely dark. The institution that was designed to create loyal slaves ended up creating the most powerful political force in the empire. The Janissaries not only served sultans, they created and destroyed them. 1449, the first rebellion. Janissaries demanded higher wages. They got them. Precedent established. The sultan's slaves could blackmail concessions under threat of violence. 1622. Sultan Osman II was put to death for attempting to reform the military. Think about that. The elite corps created to protect the Sultan killed him. It was the first time in Ottoman history that a Sultan had been killed by his own people. It would not be the last. By the 17th century, Janissaries were kingmakers. New sultans paid them accession bonuses, bribes to accept their rule. Sultans who refused or tried to circumscribe Janissary power were deposed or assassinated. The slaves had become masters, and like any corrupt institution with unlimited power, they rotted from within. The strict regulations that had made them elite began to dissolve. In 1566, Sultan Selim II legalized their marriage, bringing 300 years of celibacy laws to an end. Even worse, Janissary children were admitted into the corps. The meritocracy became a hereditary class. The Devshirme system, which had provided rigorous selection and brutal training, officially ended in 1648. Now anyone could join by buying their way in. The corps swelled from 20,000 under Suleiman to 135,000 by the early 19th century. Yet most of these were not soldiers. They were shopkeepers, artisans, porters, paper janissaries, who bought membership simply for tax exemptions and salaries. They received pay from the empire but never fought. They had become parasites. Their military performance collapsed. Russo-Turkish War of 1787 to 92, 120,000 Janissaries were defeated by 8,000 Russian troops. Let that sink in. The deadliest force in medieval warfare, outnumbering their enemy 15 to 1, got destroyed because they had become a corrupt, undisciplined mob. By the 19th century, Janissaries had transformed from elite warriors into urban terrorists. Constantinople's residents lived in fear of the very force supposed to protect them. They extorted money from civilians, operated protection rackets, started fires. 140 major fires in 28 years under one sultan, many deliberately set by Janissaries. They terrorized shopkeepers, beat civilians, and operated with complete impunity because their legal protections meant only Janissary officers could punish them. They blocked every modernization attempt. Any sultan who tried military reform faced immediate revolt. They overthrew Sultan Selim III in 1807 when he created a European-style army, then murdered him a year later. They massacred his entire 25,000-strong reform force. They weren't defending Ottoman tradition or Islamic values. They were defending their tax exemptions, their salaries, and their power to terrorize civilians without consequence. They had become what they were created to prevent, an autonomous military force more loyal to their own privileges than to the state. During the Greek War of Independence, Janissary units were so incompetent that the empire needed Egyptian military assistance. The force that once conquered half of Europe couldn't suppress a rebellion in Greece. European armies had modernized. Professional training, modern weapons, disciplined tactics. The Janissaries clung to outdated methods, refused new weapons, and relied on their political power rather than military competence. Step back and look at the complete picture of this system. Its contradictions are staggering. The Ottoman Empire violated Islamic law to kidnap Christian children, then used those converted children to conquer Christian lands. The irony is so dark it's almost incomprehensible. Serbian boys became Janissaries who conquered Serbia. Albanian boys fought against Albania. Greek boys stormed Constantinople. Bulgarian boys devastated Bulgaria. The empire weaponized parents' children against them. Some Balkan families saw opportunity and tried to enroll their sons voluntarily, a chance at power and wealth, even at the cost of religion and identity. Other families mutilated their sons, making them physically unfit, to save them from selection. The choice? Cripple your child or lose him forever. And the religious contradictions are staggering. Islamic law protected religious minorities from forced conversion. The Ottoman sultans claimed the title of caliph, defender of the faith, while systematically violating one of Islam's core principles. The ulama, the religious scholars, knew this. They justified it anyway because the Janissaries were too valuable to abandon. For over 250 years, from the 1380s until 1648, this system operated. Millions of Christian boys stolen, hundreds of thousands converted, tens of thousands turned into warriors, all in service of an empire that claimed to be the greatest Islamic power on the planet. As an innovative military force, as proof of Ottoman sophistication and power, but strip away the military history romanticism, and you're looking at something much darker. Systematic child trafficking, forced conversion, cultural genocide, identity destruction, child soldiers on an industrial scale. For centuries, Christian families lived in terror of the scouts who would come for their sons. Imagine that generational trauma. Imagine villages watching their brightest boys disappear every few years. Imagine parents knowing that their sons would return as strangers, if they returned at all, fighting for the empire that had stolen them. The military effectiveness cannot be denied. The Janissaries conquered half of Europe, created an empire that lasted 600 years, and revolutionized warfare. But that effectiveness was built on the systematic destruction of children's identities and the violation of everything the Ottoman Empire claimed to stand for. These weren't volunteer soldiers. They weren't patriotic warriors. They were manufactured, broken and rebuilt, stripped of everything they were and remade into what the empire needed them to be. The Janissaries were Europe's first modern army. They were also history's longest-running child soldier program, justified by religion, enabled by power, and sustained by fear. That's not the story most history books tell, but it's the story that actually happened. If this video opened your eyes to this dark chapter of history, hit that subscribe button. We're bringing you the historical stories that textbooks skip. Next time, we're diving into the brutal massacre that ended the Janissaries. Until then, stay epic and extraordinary.